Hi, everybody. So, welcome to the third of our energy mini series. This is a series of podcasts that we've done that essentially are looking at energy from a Leighton point of view, but also from a business point of view. So, how businesses are impacted by energy. So far, we've done two. So, we've done both of those based very much on the cost of energy from a energy usage point of view. So, we did a piece on carbon and non-commodity taxation, which is something Leighton are experts in. And we also did a piece last month around commodity and procurement. So today what we're going to do is take a maybe slightly different look and look at one other challenge that we are finding lots of businesses are talking to us about and struggling with a solution to, and that is the whole piece on carbon. And today I welcome Manal. So Manal is a consultant with us here at Leighton. She specialises in carbon reporting and carbon emissions. So we're going to have a quick chat about carbon emissions, carbon reporting, and how Leighton can help businesses on it. So Manal, hello.
Hi, hello.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you a few questions today, and we can have a bit of a chat around the world of carbon reporting and carbon emissions. So maybe to kick us off, could you maybe give us an overview as to what exactly is carbon reporting and why is it important for businesses today?
Right. So if we were to look at a carbon report itself, what does it actually look like? So we can think of it as a structured document, right? So starting with your total emissions broken down into scopes. So scope 1 for direct emissions, scope 2 for purchased electricity, scope 3 for essentially everything else, just like your supply chain, transportation, etc. So it often includes metrics like emissions intensity and comparisons to previous years or baseline years to see where you progress. So some businesses go further by adding details of energy efficiency initiatives or setting targets for future reductions. So in a nutshell, it's a data-driven but also forward-looking kind of piece of reporting. It's a tool for both accountability and action.
Okay, so interesting that's what it is for businesses. But I suppose the question that I would have is, what's in it for businesses? So why would any business take the time to do it?
Right. That's a very good question. So for one, it helps you diagnose the biggest energy consumers within your operations, right? So whether it's your manufacturing line, your heating systems, or company vehicles, a carbon report would highlight where energy and money, of course, is being wasted. So from there, it's a short step to optimizing those processes, right? So switching to more efficient machinery, to a better energy management system. So it doesn't just cut emissions, it can also cut costs as well. So there's that, and let's not forget the wider benefits. So investors care, they care a lot. Many fund managers are no longer investing in businesses who don't measure and target reducing their carbon emissions. Legal in general, Aviva and BlackRock have all stated they expect the businesses they invest in to have a carbon reduction strategy of some sorts. So there's that aspect, and there's the fact that younger generations increasingly want to work for companies that align with their values, and sustainability is a big one. So if you're looking at staff retention, you would want to be looking at carbon reporting as well and caring about the sustainable aspect of your business. So there's also the fact that consumers are watching too. So choosing a brand that acts on climate concerns is also going to be important for them. So ultimately, a carbon report is like a green business card, if you will. It tells your stakeholders you're serious about sustainability, and that's definitely a message worth sharing.
Yeah, I mean, I like that green business card analogy. I think I certainly find more and more businesses are interested in having something or having a plan. I think one of the challenges, which I know you've alluded to there, savings in costs. I think one of the challenges for businesses certainly is the fact that, as an organization, where do you start with this kind of piece of work? What do you do? Why do you do it? But where would you start? And I think that's where carbon reporting is really interesting, because carbon reporting is a good starting point for businesses, particularly if they want to make that kind of jump to reducing emissions. But reducing emissions cuts costs, which I think is you alluded to there. I think it's a really important point for businesses. Something else you mentioned though earlier when you were talking about carbon reporting, you talked about scope 1, 2, and 3. Something I deal with all the time, and so do you, but I think a lot of organizations maybe don't quite understand what scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 are. Could you maybe give us a bit more of a breakdown as to what do we mean by scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3?
Right, of course. So to simplify it and to break it down, so if we're looking at scope 1, we could say that these are your direct emissions. And what I mean by that is you can think fuel burned in your own boilers, furnaces, or essentially any part of your own process. So if it's happening on your own premises or in assets that you directly control, it's scope 1, right?
Okay.
For scope 2, these are the indirect emissions from the energy you buy, just like electricity or district heating. You might not generate those emissions directly, but they're tied to your energy consumption. So to simplify the definition for the scope, so essentially for scope 1, we could say that these are your direct emissions, right? So you can think fuel burned in your own boilers, furnaces, or any parts of your own manufacturing process. So if it's happening within your own premises or in assets you directly control, it would be considered scope 1. For scope 2, so these are the indirect emissions from the energy you buy, just like electricity or district heating. You might not generate those emissions directly, but they're tied to your energy consumption. Now for the tricky one, which is scope 3, we can essentially say that it's everything else. And what I mean by that is it includes emissions from your supply chain, business travel, employee commutes, waste disposal, and even the use of your own products. So it's broad, but it gives the most complete picture of your carbon footprint, basically.
I see. Okay, that makes a bit of sense to me. I know I work quite a lot with local councils, and certainly if any business, if you're ever trying to get onto a supplier list at a local council, I know you have to answer lots and lots of questions around how your staff get to work, etc. So I assume what that is the local council who are looking at their scope 3 emissions. So they're looking at all of their providers and all of their supply chain and saying, actually, how do your staff get to work? It goes back, interestingly enough, though, but that's an interesting point. That's interesting why it's a really useful piece of work for businesses, because if you are looking to work with organizations similar to you were saying, I think it was L&G and Aviva and BlackRock, I think similar, if you're looking to be a supplier to councils or any kind of government body, I think this is the kind of stuff you need to know your information about your own business here as well, because those government bodies are looking to work with suppliers who have a view as to how they're reducing their carbon. Okay, that's interesting. So essentially, scope 3, am I right in saying scope 3 could be fairly tricky to calculate then? Is that right?
Yes, generally speaking, that's the one that takes kind of the most expertise and kind of gathering the most data and what comes with it in terms of gathering that set data. So it is the one that most people or most businesses find difficult to kind of calculate and pinpoint.
Okay, that makes sense. So what else then would you say are the biggest challenges to go ahead and maybe putting together a report or understanding your carbon emissions? What are the other challenges businesses face?
Right. So that's a great question. So it really comes down to, I would say, kind of 3 key challenges that we've been experiencing and kind of seeing businesses experience. So first would be the resource constraint. So for many businesses, especially SMEs, carbon reporting requires time, tools, and staff that they simply don't have available. So gathering that data across energy use, transport, and supply chains can feel like a massive task. And it is sometimes. So second, there's also an expertise gap, right? So carbon reporting isn't all that straightforward. It involves understanding emission categories like what we just talked about, scope 1, 2, and 3, applying the right methodologies and staying updated with evolving frameworks and regulations like SECR in the UK or the GHG protocol internationally. So many businesses don't really have that expertise in-house. And the third one I would say is the fact that it's simply a relatively new and evolving field. Until recently, sustainability wasn't really a top priority for a lot of companies. Now, with increasing pressure from regulators, investors, and consumers, businesses are trying to catch up. And as standards evolve, it can be hard to know where to start or what's good enough. So there is a silver lining. There's always good news.
Yep.
So there are tools and frameworks and expertise to make carbon reporting easier, and they're all improving. So businesses don't have to figure this out alone. They can lean on consultants, digital tools, and evolving guidance to make sure the process is more manageable and impactful.
Yeah, I mean, I know the businesses I come across who ask me about this, and actually more and more businesses do ask me about this. They tend to, I think the usual starting point is we don't know where to start, or from a resource point of view, it's no one's natural position and role in the business.
Right.
So it might be the SLT may well be really, really keen on saying, well, actually, we'd love to have an emissions target, or we'd love to reduce our carbon, or actually, quite frankly, our energy bills have soared over the last 4 to 5 years, and we'd like to reduce our energy bill. But where do we start? And I think you're right. I think the lack of knowledge in this space is fairly challenging, and it's a fairly new space. You know, if you think about it from an industry point of view, absolutely, there's been carbon reporting for 15, 20 years, but actually, it's only probably in the last 5, 6 years that it's become something that people have substantially do. You also touched there on regulatory challenges. So in the UK, what's the regulatory landscape look like in the UK? Are there any specific regulations that businesses need to follow?
Right. So the UK has a solid framework to drive the carbon reporting and greenhouse gas reduction. So this is all kind of supporting the net zero target for 2050, right? This is all in line with that goal. So the key regulations, we could talk about SECR, which is the Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting. It requires large businesses to report on their energy use, their GHG emissions, both scope 1 and 2, and actions to improve that energy aspect and their energy efficiency. There's also the UK ETS, or the UK Emissions Trading Scheme, which pushes energy-intensive industries to track and reduce their direct emissions using a cap and trade system, where exceeding those limits means paying for extra allowances. Now, pre-Brexit, this was called EU ETS, but for larger companies, climate-related financial disclosures are becoming more mandatory, covering risks, opportunities, and GHG emissions across all scopes, both 1 and 2, and also 3. So those are the kind of regulations we could look at for the large businesses. But even for smaller businesses, incentives like the CCL, or the Climate Change Levy exemptions, and funding from the IETF, Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, make cutting emissions much, much more affordable. So together, these measures kind of push the businesses to be more transparent and proactive in reducing their carbon footprint. So there's really one for every business in every size.
Okay, that kind of makes sense. I think my view has always been with these things, particularly regulatory piece, is I just see it as an opportunity. You know, from an organizational point of view, the reality is the regulatory stuff is something you'll have to do. I would guess as we move towards 2035 and 2050, it might get even more intense. But see it as an opportunity. You know, if you're having to put a load of data together for a regulatory report, and you're collecting that data, well, why not utilize that data? Data's only as good as data you then use. And I think this is what you're kind of saying here is putting this into one piece, this carbon report into one piece that actually covers your regulatory piece. It gives you an understanding of what your emissions are, but then most importantly, it allows you to think about, well, how do I reduce those emissions? And that reduction is the piece that really makes the difference. So actually, I always see regulatory stuff as an opportunity. If you're going to have to do this reporting, make sure you're utilizing that data you're reporting, because if you don't utilize it and all you do is submit it, and great, you've ticked your box, don't have to do that compliance piece anymore, but are you really taking advantage of it? Okay, so from the regulatory point of view, do you say when we actually come to doing the reporting itself, what would you say are the different ways of reporting? So I assume some of this stuff is quite tricky to understand or break down and report. How would you make sure as a business that you are reporting in a standardized way? Are there any standard ways of reporting carbon emissions?
Right. So there are a few key carbon reporting frameworks, each one with its own focus. So the first one we can talk about is the GHG protocol. So it's the global standard, right? So it breaks down emissions into scope 1, 2, and 3. It's the foundation for most reporting we can see in every country. But for UK businesses, we can talk SECR, right? So streamlined energy and carbon reporting. It simplifies things by focusing on energy use and emissions for compliance. Then there's the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is more about the bigger picture, connecting your emissions data to climate risks and opportunities. As for methodology, it's all about using the right emission factors, right? So with expertise, you kind of get to know which ones to use. But to simplify it, basically the formulas that convert activities like energy use, transport, fuel into CO2 equivalents. So the main point here is to kind of convert everything into CO2 emissions. For the UK, for energy, specific factors from the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero are issued every year. So we can always use those for the UK, and they are the go-to for us as well. So that's for scope 1 and scope 2 mainly. Scope 3 can be slightly more tricky, which means it's combining data from suppliers with some educated estimates. It's about finding a balance between precision and practicality. And that's precisely where that expertise and kind of that experience within the field kind of comes in handy.
So from what you're saying, there's quite a lot of data to capture. So how do businesses do that? What is the challenge of collecting all the accurate data? And it seems like a fairly big job to do, collecting all of the emissions data. Is it a big job? But also probably more importantly, how do businesses overcome the challenge of collecting all of their emissions data? What solutions are there?
Right. So I would say it is absolutely a challenge. I would say it is one of the main challenges. So collecting accurate emissions data is a big hurdle for many businesses. So the data often comes from different parts of the organization. It might be energy bills, fuel usage, supply chain info. It could be different departments that don't really kind of communicate with each other. So it's hard to kind of group that into one. So it's rarely in one place or within the same format. Add to that the challenge of knowing what's actually needed for things like scope 3, and it's easy to see why companies struggle in that case. So partnering with consultants who know the ins and outs of reporting frameworks can also take the headache out of the process, and that could be by kind of tailoring their approach, knowing that they kind of understand your business from a manufacturing standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, so they could tailor their approach to gather that data and simplify the process for you.
Yeah, I think this is a classic example of from an organizational point of view, of getting outside support and using expertise, because it is such a niche area, but such an important area. It's one of those areas whereby you do need that expertise. It isn't something I think that most businesses can just do themselves. You need to rely on someone who's done it and knows how to do it. I mean, we offer it at Leighton. I think one of the reasons we offer it at Leighton is it matches exactly what we do in other areas, which is we offer services and we offer expertise that businesses don't have outside of their own organization. Similar to, if you look at some of our R&D claims, it's a really specific technical product. Businesses may not do it all the time, so relying on a consultant to do it, I think, makes a lot of sense. Hence, we do it now at Leighton on the basis of having people here like you who know this inside out and have done it before. So let's talk maybe let's talk now a tiny bit about actually the bit that I find the most interesting, which is the carbon reduction bit. So the carbon reduction strategies. So maybe take me through what are some effective carbon reduction strategies that businesses can adopt? So maybe they've done some carbon reporting and they've got an idea of their emissions. What can they focus on when it comes to actually maybe reducing their emissions, which is, ultimately the exciting bit.
Right. So we can think of this one as like solving a puzzle, one emissions piece at a time, right? So effective carbon reduction strategies often start with energy efficiency. It's the most simple to target, to diagnose, and to kind of focus on. So it might be by upgrading your machinery to energy efficient machinery, optimizing your operations, using renewable energy. Some of these, in terms of actual examples, might be just kind of switching to LED lighting, as simple as that. So another aspect would be transportation, right? It's another key area, with many businesses shifting to electric vehicles or streamlining logistics in the supply chain as well. It could be by collaborating with suppliers to source sustainably and reduce emissions. So there are a lot of ways we could look at this, and parts of gathering that data, studying that data, analyzing that data, and coming up with a diagnosis, if you will, or parts of the business where things are not as optimized as they could be from a sustainability and cost standpoint, that enables us to look at where we can improve upon and what we can do based on that case.
Yeah, I mean, I came across, and it's interesting because here we've moved to electric vehicles from a company perspective. But what's really interesting, and it made me think. We were visiting a client the other day, and getting there, having an electric vehicle, but they didn't have any electric charging, which obviously a lot of businesses don't in the UK. The infrastructure on charging is still kind of behind. But what was really interesting is the thought process of going, oh, that's quite interesting. Actually, if they installed electric charging, that would impact on their scope 3. So that would be a beneficial impact they're making on their scope 3 if they offered electric vehicle charging to their clients who were coming to visit their offices. And it's that knock-on effect, and I think this is the point, isn't it? The whole knock-on effect of everybody joining together and thinking about what the bigger picture looks like. Okay, that kind of makes a bit of sense. What about things like solar, wind, biomass, or generation? Actually, what about generation? How do you see businesses maybe being able to find a way of utilizing either renewable energy sources, so solar, wind, biomass, or ultimately generating energy? How do you think that could look for businesses?
So that specific kind of idea, the renewable energy kind of realm, is moving more from a nice idea to have to a necessary infrastructure year on year. So solar panels on site can cut operational costs and emissions, and wind and biomass kind of power offers scalable options for larger facilities. We've seen some of our clients kind of look for ways to implement this and in order to optimize their energy costs, reduce their emissions as well. So the UK grid is also going towards green generation as well, which means buying renewable electricity is going to be increasingly cost effective. And as technology improves and costs drop, we'll see more of these renewables become the default, not the actual exception, especially with government incentives, as you mentioned earlier, multiplying year on year until we reach 2050. So I guess that's where we stand on things like that. And we've also seen a lot of clients and a lot of businesses wanting to move to that renewables route and kind of wanting to generate their own energy. So it would be the popular choice, if you will, to kind of go down.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you know, it's an industry that's interesting and new and different. And I suppose, you know, we've come through a period over the last 20 years worldwide of really understanding the climate to seeing the real impact of climate change, and carbon emissions plays an impact in that. What are there any misconceptions or myths about carbon reporting and carbon reduction that businesses maybe should be aware of?
So, yeah, I like this question because that's kind of the start of a conversation with every business we kind of talk to. So one common myth is that carbon reporting is actually only for large companies. It's not. So in reality, even smaller businesses can benefit from understanding and reducing their emissions. This often uncovers cost savings and operational efficiencies in the process, as we've mentioned earlier. So there's also the fact that many think carbon reporting is this overly complex and expensive process to go through. It can be detailed, yes, but starting with key areas like energy use could make it more manageable. And of course, working with experienced consultants can also simplify the process greatly. So these kind of experienced people could help businesses focus on those high impact areas and ensure that their reporting is accurate and align with best practices, as of course regulations change and they improve, and technologies also change and improve. So yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So maybe to wrap us up, what would you recommend then if you were a business, is an organization in the UK, big, small, medium, whatever size it may be, when it comes to carbon emissions? What would you suggest is the first thing they need to do? What would you suggest to a business to think about and start doing now?
As a business, if I were a business owner, I would think about the fact that carbon reporting is a powerful way to demonstrate my commitment as a business to sustainability. So it would give my consumers the transparency they expect. It would show that that my business isn't just making promises, but actually taking measurable action. For investors as well, it's also simply about mitigating risk. So if I'm ahead of the curve on sustainability, I'm less likely to face penalties and backlash down the line. And in today's world where trust and accountability matter more than ever, carbon reporting helps solidify that reputation and build stronger connections with eco-conscious stakeholders. So the first step I would take towards achieving all of that is basically just knowing where I am today, where I stand in terms of an emissions standpoint, in terms of an energy efficiency kind of standpoint, trying to gather all that data that will tell me that information, utilize that data to diagnose what is wrong within my process, within my business. And a way to do that is to kind of reach out to experts that can help you do that, since they're up to date with regulations, with technologies that would simplify gathering that data. And I would go from there. Honestly, I would really go from there, because once you have that diagnosis, you can then kind of tailor your approach to finding solutions based on the problem that you think you have or that you discovered you have. So that's where I would start.
Fantastic. I wouldn't disagree. I think you need to know where you are today if you're going to plan where you want to be tomorrow. And I think getting that data and being in that position is really worthwhile. Thanks for your time today, Manal. I was going to say I'm going to talk briefly about our next podcast mini series, because that's the end of it, the energy mini series. This is our third one, but our next podcast mini series is women in business. So I think it would be wrong of me not to ask you
right.
what your background is. So as a woman in business, so what exactly is your background? What did you study?
Right. So I am an aerospace engineer, academically speaking. I did also have some experience within the aerospace engineering industry. I've quickly seen that it is no secret that the aerospace industry is one of the most polluters in the world. So I thought about kind of making a difference using that expertise and using that academic background. So that's what brought me here today, and 2 wonderful years later at Leighton. I guess we're now helping businesses kind of go towards the sustainability